The underwear Olympics are almost underway. We got 3 up and 3 down. Also, the future of Russ. We got all that more. I'm Jason Fitz, and it is time for Zero Blitz. Welcome to Zero Blitz. I'm Jason Fitz. We're going to have some great expertise in this show. We're going to make you smarter with some analytics mindset that I'm not smart enough to present, but Eric Eager is going to join us, and he will do it for you. Before we get to that, though, the big news of the day is Russ. Everybody's heard Russell Wilson. He made it clear on Brandon Marshall's show that he intends to stay, or he would love to stay in Denver. That's what he wants. He also told you he's going to win 2 championships in the next 5 years. All the things that Russ says. And it leaves us wondering, well, what does Russ know? What is Russ trying to accomplish? What does Russ think is next? Maybe, just maybe, we need to take all of this for face value to what it is. And it's just Russ being Russ. I'm not sure Russell Wilson is the sort of person that you want on your team to be based in reality. Doesn't feel like that's the world he lives in. From the outset, the way Bronco country, let's ride, the way he presents so much of himself is, at times, at best, a caricature, right? And so now we're asking somebody that has essentially become more popular than he is good at what he does to suddenly be grounded in the reality of the situation. Now, I know we're in this world where athletes want to come out and control their narrative, and we love that. We love it when athletes go on different shows and they basically drill down on what they want because it gives us straight from their mouths what they think their future looks like. But not every athlete, in my mind, is prepared to be real. It takes something raw from the interviewer and from the interviewee. One thing I love about The Pivot, for example, and I'll just shout out to Ryan Clark and the guys, I love the work that they do. And part of the reason that their show is great is because they're able to get everybody sort of relaxed to the point that they give you information you might not get everywhere else. So you get something very real. What has Shannon Sharp been doing on Club Shay Shay, right? Like the same sort of thing. You're getting real reaction from people, and it makes for great interviews. Was that this for us? Do we really think that Russell Wilson came into this and said, you know what, America, I'm going to speak my truth. It's going to be authentic, and I'm going to be real with you. Because in order to be real with us, Russ would have had to tell us where it went wrong, where the perception has gone wrong, how it's going to change, what's going to change. Those are all things that could have been captured in the interview. And instead, what are we running with? A soundbite. A soundbite you've heard all day. A soundbite you'll hear all week. And a soundbite that's really only a soundbite because it came from Russ. What's he say? When you break down what he says, he wants to stay in Denver. Well, people in hell want ice water. Also, is he going to turn around and say, I don't want to be here? That doesn't serve anybody in this process, especially when you're somebody who's worried about image as Russ is. Then he says, I want to win 2 championships in the next 5 years. Again, what else is he going to say? Man, I hope I just don't suck. That's not real. You have to think about how we perceive quarterbacks. And one thing about quarterbacks that I find particularly interesting is that they always know the right thing to say at the right time. It's like they're coached to that from the time they're 10 years old. Never really answer a question. Always make sure that you're giving everybody else the credit and taking all of the blame, all of the cliches. And isn't that what Russ is at this point? He's a cliche. If you were writing a Disney movie about a quarterback, wouldn't the character essentially be Russell Wilson? And if you were watching a Disney movie about a quarterback in all of its cheesy glory, would you expect in the darkest moment of your career that that quarterback would turn around and have the presence of mind to be real and authentic? I didn't. In fact, when I heard what Russ said, I didn't react at all. My surprise isn't to what Russ said. My surprise is that we're trying to turn it into a story. Because all Russell Wilson did is what Russell Wilson does every single time. He doesn't tell you the truth. He tells you what he thinks you want to hear. He tells you what makes him feel good. He wants to be a feel-good story. Now, we love that when you're winning. You win, you can be cheesy. You win, you can be vapid. You can be empty. You can be all of those things. You win football games, nobody cares. You win football games for the Seahawks with a passionate fan base and a coach that everybody loves and these big personalities all over the place. You're a part of something special. We love that. Hey, it's cheesy, but we love it. We love it until we don't. The difference for Russ isn't in his tone. It isn't how he's presenting himself. It's none of that. What Russ is doing right now is the same thing he's done his whole career. And we should have been rolling our eyes to it the entire time. We didn't early on because Seattle won football games. Now, with the Broncos, it sucks. And they've paid him too much money to even just be mediocre. They paid him too much money to suck, but they paid him way too much money to just be average. So now Russ has to face the music. And the music is very simple. It doesn't look like Russ has a real future starting in the NFL. It doesn't look like the Broncos have an easy path to get out of the money that they spent. So now what you have are two people that are going to get divorced, but they're living in the same house. And as much as we want to sit there like this is some version of Vanderpump and watch all the drama and see what happens when it percolates, that's not Russ's style. He's going to take the high road, if that's what you want to call it. He's not going to say anything. And he's going to do everything to make sure that when it's all said and done, he's as blameless as he can be. But the one thing Russ is forgetting is that he does have blame for one thing, not being good enough anymore. And as long as he's not good enough, then all we're going to do is roll our eyes and laugh at every ounce of what he has to say about this situation. You would think I'm done talking about it. I am done talking about it for a minute, but it's time to get particularly smart on this show because it is almost combine time. That's easy for me to say. And that means we need some expertise. We're about to get a hell of a lot smarter. Like, there's certain things that I can guarantee you this conversation is going to make you smarter than I can make anybody because we're joined now by Eric Eager, VP of Sumer Sports, godfather, as they say, of football analytics. Young to be a godfather, but still, we'll give him the godfather title. Let's start with the most important thing because I was listening to your episode with Dimitrov today. And may or may not have mentioned that you were headed to Indy to the scouting combine, which is fine. Everybody's going to scouting combine. That's great. You went on a private jet. So how was the private jet experience for you, my friend?
Jason, it's good to be here. It was fun. It's the second time I've taken the jet. And I got to say that the not having to go through security certainly is a benefit. Yeah, not having to wear everything is great about it. I'm not going to lie. It was a good time. And yeah, hopefully it's not the last time.
Can I give you a first world complaint here? Because in my music career, I was lucky enough to be on a private jet many times. All right. But this is what I'll say. When we were on private jets, right, there was always like 4 comfy seats and then benches in the back, right? And the 4 comfy seats always that like the lead singer's going to get one of them, right? And then she got married. So the lead singer and her husband. So that's 2 of the 4 seats. And then her brothers were getting the other 2 seats, which then meant the rest of us were on this little bench. And I'm sitting next to like our production manager, who's a solid 400 pounds on this bench, tiny bench. And I'm just like sitting like this, upright, can't sleep, can't do. Like I have had more bad private jet experiences than good ones. So like was it just the 2 of you rolling deep on the PJ? Like how many people were we talking about here?
No, it was 5. It was pretty small. I mean, there was 5 seats. There was a bed. There was a bathroom. There were snacks everywhere. There was a Wi-Fi. It was pretty nice. I got to tell you. And you could get up and walk around. It was nice. And it was only, Atlanta to Indianapolis. So, you're talking, an hour and a half. So it wasn't too bad at all.
See, you're living the dream. Now that I've complained about a private jet, I've now made this the least relatable podcast in history. So I want to get to some combine stuff, but first I'm hoping that you make me seem really smart here. We have not talked about this. You do not know that I'm going to give you my opinion here, and I'm going to lead this question one way, but I still to this day, all this time later, think that taking the ball first in overtime was fine in the Super Bowl. You're the analytics guy. Am I wrong? Have I lost my mind?
I think you're taking the ball first is defensible for sure. I would have in real time. I felt as a Kansas City fan that they lucked out by getting it second. But every single mathematical analysis has shown that it's basically a coin flip. Whoever gets the ball first. And that's, a great job by Michael Lopez and his team in the league office with the rule change to make it basically a coin flip. So no, I don't think it's that. Of all the Kyle Shanahan decisions on Super Bowl Sunday, I don't think it was a bad one at all. I probably would have gone for the 4th down inside the 10-yard line on the first drive if I decide to take the ball. And if I take the ball, I probably would have gone for 2 on the first touchdown. But taking the ball in and of itself, not the worst decision anybody's ever made.
So talk to me about this, because now we're going to use this to segue into the combine. Where's the line between what the numbers tell you and what feel tells you. Because one thing that was interesting, even in your show talking with Thomas, when you guys were talking about the numbers and versus the human element of scouting, I think the same thing's sort of true on the sideline. Like the numbers tell you one thing, but just the feel of the game. Like analytics can be great, but at the end of the day, analytics don't know necessarily that it's this fourth down against this quarterback in this situation with this momentum. Like, where's the line?
Well, I think you allow the line to be where the error bars are the biggest, right? I mean, the fact is there's some places where, and this came up today, like there are some places where the math is kind of unequivocal. If you take a tight end high in the draft, the surplus value versus a position like tackle or wide receiver or quarterback, it's just not going to get you there. And we've seen the history of the game, and the vast majority of tight ends don't work out to the degree that I think the math is pretty unequivocal. Now, between, whether or not your math likes Drake May or likes Jaden Daniels, like I would say most models are probably going to come out pretty even on the guy. So I'm going to go to a guy like Thomas Dimitroff or a guy like JT O'Sullivan, one of my favorite quarterback minds in the world. I'm going to go to one of those guys and be like, hey, what does your eye test say? So to me, it comes down to how big are the error bars, how big is the precedent, and how often have we seen this thing before? To your question about the Super Bowl, the other part is we don't have a ton of data on that overtime before. We've only seen it happen once. So I'm going to be far less stringent to the math in a situation like that. The same thing's true when it comes to like a quarterback like an Anthony Richardson versus like a tight end like Brock Bowers, where I've seen a lot of Brock Bowers come around. I've seen a lot of tight ends where they've called them generational, and I've seen it just simply never work out, like Kyle Pitts. And so my voraciousness in using the math is going to probably be proportional to how much data that there is, and the leaning that I have towards subject matter expertise and the gut feel is going to be inversely proportional to how much data we have.
So where it gets interesting to me with the combine starting Thursday is I'm trying to figure out where the value is, because Marvin Harrison Jr., he's not showing up. And I don't necessarily think that's the wrong approach, right? If you're Marvin Harrison Jr., you could just turn around and say, hey, look at my tape. Like, you want to see what I can do? I've given you play. Like, he's not somebody like Anthony Richardson with limited college tape, right? So it becomes interesting because you guys talked on your show about the fact that less teams are going. Now we see less players going. Like, is there a spot where between the analytics that we do have and the numbers that we can crunch and the film that exists, what is the point of running the 40-yard dash if you're Marvin Harrison Jr.? Like, all you're going to do is hurt your value if it doesn't live up to expectations, and you can't exceed expectations.
Well, we saw that 2 years ago with Drake London, right, where he kind of called everybody's bluff. He had an injury at USC. People thought he was maybe on the slower end. He really didn't run a 40 here. He didn't run really a 40 at his pro day. Called everybody's bluff. He ended up being the first wide receiver taken. And I think that set a precedent. Now we're not only getting Marvin Harrison not coming in here and testing, he's not going to come here and interview at all either, which is, to me, part of the other thing where the general managers and the evaluators and everything are going to say that's where a lot of the value is inherent in some of the stuff that's going on. Here is sort of the interpersonal stuff where the interviews are happening and everything. So to your point about that, I think it's a big deal where maybe they're not testing, but you're seeing like their size is how big is Caleb Williams? I want to know, like, how much does Jaden Daniels weigh? He looks awfully thin to me, but if he comes in and weighs in the 220 area, maybe I'm a little bit assuaged by that. I think the value is going to be in the interpersonal stuff and how they conduct themselves. But to your point, it's going to be about more of those fringe guys, because the guys at the top of the draft are simply going to opt out. And I think for them, it's probably sage for them to do so at this point.
There's a part of me too that feels like it makes sense for everybody involved, because sometimes, we call it the underwear Olympics for a reason, right? Like, there's so little of this that is actually a transferable skill. I had a smart person that played in the league a few years ago tell me that it's not about, a fat guy running the 40, because they're never going to run the 40. It's about the discipline of, you were asked to do this and you were asked to train for this. How did you do with that assignment? That's fine. But like, we can let those things really change our opinion too much. So I don't know. In my mind, I want to think that maybe there's a benefit to the team for guys like Jaden and Caleb not working out, because at some point you got to trust the tape and the information we have, don't you?
I think so. And I think that for draft nicks and for the media I think that we allow the combine to have a way bigger effect than maybe it does. But at the same time, we do have the examples of Vernon Davis running a 4.3 and being picked in the top 10. We have examples of Mac Jones, who was Arkansas's quarterback, who ran in the 4.3s and all of a sudden was a first-round pick as a wide receiver of the Jacksonville Jaguars in the 2005 draft, if I'm not mistaken. And so that certainly has happened where we've allowed, all the way back to Tony Mandarich in 1989, where the draft was Troy Aikman, Deion Sanders, Barry Sanders, and Derek Thomas. And the one guy that's a bust of those top was a combine hero, right? I think that teams are far more, because of on-field tracking data through companies like telemetry, the GPS systems and everything, they're able to discern that the player's a good or bad athlete even before this time. And this is more of a reinforcement of that. I think we are kind of using the draft, the combine, and this entire draft process. It is less herky-jerky than it has been in the past. I think that the lessening of the combine is probably a good thing. Maybe not so for the teams. I think the teams have already lessened its weight to a degree that it's probably in the proper place at the moment anyway. But for the media and everything, I do think that it's probably going to equilibrate to that point in the near future.
All right. So does the math tell you any one quarterback stands out above the others?
Well, the Jaden Daniels is the one whose math stands out for a couple of reasons. Firstly, Jaden Daniels' 2023 season is the best season of any quarterback in this draft, and that includes Caleb Williams' season. The problem is he also has a metric that has been shown to be very predictive of quarterbacks failing in the NFL, and that's pressure to sack ratio. And so in 2022, 30% of Jalen Daniels' pressures turned into sacks. That would have been, that's the highest of any first round quarterback that's ever going to be taken. This past year, it improved to 20%. But that average number of about, over the last 2 years, about 24, 25% is going to be the highest of any first round quarterback that's ever taken. And so when we look back at why was Justin Fields not drafted as high, and why was Justin Fields not producing at a level that maybe some of his PFF metrics and everybody would have assumed, it's always, you look back, it's always that pressure to sack ratio. Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech converted just 11.3 of his pressures to sacks. In the NFL, that number is 11.4. It's an incredibly stable statistic. And when you look at, the good quarterbacks in the NFL right now, they're predominantly quarterbacks that can avoid sacks. And when I look at Daniels, when I think of him versus Drake May, and when I think of him versus Caleb Williams, there's a lot to like. There's a lot of rushing ability. There's a lot of accuracy. There's a lot of explosiveness. But he had a really hard time both at Arizona State, but also at LSU of avoiding sacks. And that's a thing when you're picked in the top 5, you're generally speaking going to a bad football team that's not going to be able to protect you. And can you avoid those negative plays? Because a sack is worth -2 points to an offense, and they're hidden. And we've seen a lot of quarterbacks struggle under that weight when they've joined teams in the top 10 of the draft.
Yeah, which also, it's stunning the way you just put that, because I talked to 2 different draft people I think are smart that have been ripping through the film in the last week. And they both said it's disturbing how bad it is when the pocket isn't clean, and it's alarming how great it is when it is. So people are seeing that on tape. You're just seeing the math that stands through all of it. All right, the math is only just beginning. When we come back, I'm going to get some thoughts on the entire league, not just the combine, but the entire league with Eric. All right, Eric, we're going to play a little game here. Not really a game. It's just sort of a way to phrase this. 3 up, 3 down. All right, so I'm going to give you some franchises that maybe we're looking at and saying, hey, it seems like things are either looking up or looking down. You tell me if anything stands out to you in what you've seen in the numbers, or if it makes sense to you. Make sense to you so far?
Yep.
We'll start with the positive, because I like being positive in general. I think everybody feels like the Texans are up, right? So that's an easy one here. Easy one. But when you look at the numbers, is it sustainable in your mind?
I think it is. When you look at, the quarterback on a rookie deal, you look at he's playing the game differently, where you look at his completion percentage isn't necessarily sky high, but his average depth of target is one of the league's best. Patrick Mahomes this year, career low in average depth of target. He had to do it differently because the league played him differently. The NFL challenged CJ Stroud to go down the field, and he did. And that's a good omen. They're a team that has resources because of not having to pay him a ton. So I like their straights moving forward, and obviously being able to keep Bobby Slowick, a former colleague of mine at PFF, as the offensive coordinator at least for one more year. Generally speaking, when you think of sophomore slumps for quarterbacks, it's oftentimes because Josh McDaniels does a great job with Mac Jones. Josh McDaniels gets a head coaching job, and now Mac Jones has to deal with new play callers, right? And CJ Stroud doesn't have to deal with that in year two.
So should we have seen the CJ Stroud thing coming? I mean, I cover a lot of college football. I think a lot of us thought he was going to be very good. But did you see anything in the numbers coming in that made you think that we were maybe undervaluing him before last year's draft?
I liked him as QB1. I mean, I think it's easy to go back and say that, but no, I don't think especially. His numbers weren't better than Bryce Young's and in a lot of different categories. I think the one place where you could look, but every quarterback's got a game like this, but the semifinal game against Georgia was really the game where you're talking about a defense with a lot of NFL players in it. He was phenomenal in it from basically the whole time. And that was really the one game that translated into the NFL. But no, I don't think so. I think that was a game he had a lot of headwinds as a prospect. And so good on the Houston Texans for taking him, and good on him for overcoming some of the things that have set back a lot of Ohio State quarterbacks in the past.
All right, so let's take a look at another franchise everybody thinks is on their way up, and it's the Chargers, simply by adding Harbaugh. So I'm always interested in this situation because the Justin Herbert debate is starting to get a little bit more heated. Like, it feels like people have more Herbert opinions one way or the other. So I put Harbaugh in with Herbert, and then the fact that Harbaugh's won so quickly everywhere he's gone, it feels like, does that mean that they're trending up to you?
I think so long term. I mean, I think Joe Hortiz is a good GM hire. They've gotten some really sharp people in that building now. But I would caution, when he took over the 49ers in 2011, they already had Vernon Davis. Alex Smith was a number one pick, Michael Crabtree, Frank Gore. On the defensive side, they had Justin Smith, Navarro Bowman, Patrick Willis. They had a lot of talent. This Chargers team has Herbert, Slater, some wide receivers that they may or may not keep. There's not a ton of talent left on that team right now. And so I think that is one place where I would caution. I think they're going to be good in a couple years, but I don't think for 2024 that they're going to be challenging Kansas City for the AFC West, for example.
All right, so what about the Lions? Everybody's up on the Lions, even with the NFC Championship loss. Sustainable? You up on the Lions long term?
I think so, only because Ben Johnson is going to be I don't think Ben Johnson's going to be a head coach in the NFL. I think he wants to be a coordinator. I think he wants to work for Dan Campbell. And I think as long as that's the case, I think that the Detroit Lions can be sustainable with Jared Goff, a great offensive line, and some cap space. I mean, they're a top 10 team in terms of cap space. They need to restore that defense. They went as far as they went this year, even basically by swinging and missing down their entire back seven, both in the draft and, through free agency. And I think if they hit on some of those players in free agency and the draft, they should at least have an average defense, which should propel them to being favorites in the NFC North again and being a team that, with Dallas, San Francisco, and Philadelphia take steps back again, being a favorite in the NFC.
All right, so every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Now we got to be Debbie Downer. So teams that are headed in the wrong direction. Feels like the Patriots are pretty easy one to put here on the list because it's a massive rebuild. Is there anything that you see that gives Patriot fans immediate hope?
I think if they trade back in the draft, they have that third pick. I think that pick's going to be coveted, much like that pick when San Francisco traded, I think with Miami in 2011 and 2021, and we're able to just sort of move up and pick Trey Lance. That took a huge haul to do, and that ended up being a big miss for San Francisco, but they had to pay a lot for it. I think New England is more than just a quarterback away, which means they should probably trade back and build, from the offensive line. And I also think the defense, which is really good last year with Belichick, is going to take a step back because, no one's probably as good as Belichick is, more than the sum of the parts. So if they trade back, I think that the arrow is up. If they just say, look, a quarterback's all we need, I think that they're going to be in a tough situation.
All right, so I'm going to make you my advisor. I'm the GM of the Bears. Very clearly, we have all the data on Fields. You keeping Fields or are you drafting somebody else? There's a reason I'll ask you. So keeping Fields or are you drafting?
I'm drafting somebody else.
And who are you drafting?
I am trading the first pick to Washington for the second pick, and I'm taking Drake May.
So you have then Washington trading up to 1 for Caleb Williams, Drake May going 2 to the Bears, which means Jaden Daniels would be your third quarterback on the list and the one that people would be trading for. If you are a team trading later in the first round, and I'm making you the advisor at this point, would you be comfortable paying a king's ransom to move up to get Jaden Daniels?
I think if I was a team like Minnesota, which has 2 good tackles, Justin Jefferson at wide receiver, who's, really looking for you to step up and make a play, yes. I think if I'm a team that's not in that position, then I'm going to have second thoughts. So I qualify that answer. So I think it's yes if you have the players to protect Jaden Daniels. And that's rare. That's only about a few of the teams in the league. But Minnesota could be a team because of the offensive line that they have.
All right, let's go with another team headed in the wrong direction. One that I would put into this conversation too. Let's say Denver. I mean, I started the show talking about Russell Wilson. So if you're the Broncos, it feels like you're headed in the wrong direction. Did you see something there that gives Broncos fans more immediate hope?
I mean, I think Sean Payton did a good job this year of covering up Russell Wilson's warts. They did, down the field stuff, when that was necessary early in the year, and then shortened the things up when he showed that he, couldn't, kind of cut it downfield. The defense did okay when it needed to. So there were things that were positive. The problem is now when they cut Russell Wilson before the fifth day of the league year, they're just not going to have the resources to build that talent up. And there are, they had to trade, a back half of the first round pick, for Peyton in the first place. So yeah, with respect to this year and possibly next, I just don't see how they're all that competitive because of the lack of resource they have. I think long-term, I think Peyton will figure it out because he's such a great coach. But these next few years are going to be hard. This was the one year where they said, give it a go with Russell. I think he did an okay job. I think if a few bounces go their way, they're in the playoffs and they're figuring it out. And they didn't. And so they're going to move on and it's not going to be all that great financially. But I think long-term, I think the Broncos are going to be okay.
Long-term, is Russ starting anywhere?
No, I think Russell Wilson's career is all but over. I think he's going to have 1 year maybe where he goes to maybe a team like Minnesota or a team like maybe Vegas, where he goes and sticks it to Denver and takes a 1 year deal worth the league minimum, and Denver has to pay kind of all of that paragraph 5, and he gets no offsets, and he goes and starts somewhere. But I think much like Cam Newton, where it's like he's kind of bigger than life, where he can't go somewhere and be a backup because, for political reasons. And I just don't know if he can go anywhere and be a high-end starter at this point, just because, with a lot of quarterbacks, the place that they went at the beginning of their career was so engineered for them that when they go somewhere else, it doesn't look all that great.
All right, one more that seems like they're on the wrong path. The Bills couldn't get it done this year. Any reason for the Bills to think that next year suddenly they figure it out?
No, I think the Bills are in the similar position that the Chargers are in, right? Where the salary cap is bad. Unlike the Chargers, though, they can't really get out from under Diggs. They can't, Diggs had 13 straight games without 100 yards last year. Von Miller had 0 sacks in 12 games this year. They can't really get out from under him. So those are 2 albatrosses on their cap. Josh Allen, I think, was the MVP of the league this year. Do they get a repeat season out of him? Probably not. So you have to assume that they're going to go and regress a little bit. You assume that the Jets, if Rodgers plays a whole year, will be better. Miami, I think McDaniel's got a clue, and they'll be probably a little bit better as well. So it sucks because I think that the Bills have been the league's best team for multiple stanzas of the last 3-4 years. But I just think that it's awfully hard to maintain it the way that they have. So I sort of agree with you here.
You started the show by talking about how tight ends don't add enough value to make it worth it. What one position in the draft is worth reaching in the first round for?
I think, quarterback is the easy one. I think that after that, it's probably edge player. Edge player is one of those positions where it's as solved as any in the NFL. What they do is as akin to track and field as anything, where if the guy's big, fast, and strong and he can get off the ball and he was productive in college, he's probably going to be a pretty good pro. And so if I have to trade up and get a player like that, the hit rate for players in the top end of the draft with that skill set is pretty high. And it's really hard to find a player. If you look at like the top 10 contracts of edge players in the NFL, they're all either drafted by that team, extended by that team, or traded for. You almost never can get a really top end edge player in free agency. So I generally speaking would pay up for those kind of players in the draft.
Follow him on Twitter at @EricEager_. Man, I appreciate you making me so smart. I'm going to take all of the credit for being brilliant. It was all me, none you. No, I appreciate you very much. Enjoy Indianapolis and all of its fine cuisine and offerings.
Jason, thanks for having me on, man. Take care.
That's it for us. CMAC back tomorrow with the exempt list. You know that. You got to check it out every single week. I'll be back on Thursday with inside coverage. This week's going to be stacked. I mean, obviously, C-Rob and Jory are at the Combine, which means it is going to be electric. We'll make sure that any breaking news is there. We will cover it all from the ground. So we'll make sure they're having a great time in Indy. We'll make sure that we get you all of the information you need. Follow me on Twitter at Jason Fitz. Follow Stone at SJ Rochelle, doing God's work behind the glass. Leave us that 5-star review. Rate, subscribe, tell your friends, your family, enemies, tell everybody to hang out with us every single week. We will be back next Monday.